Hello there. In this video, we're going to be building the outer box for Carbon. It is built in two pieces and you'll end up assembling them like this onto the drive as you get further together, as you start putting everything together. I found it easier to assemble it into halves and then put it together as we are finally assembling the drive. So let's get started. All right, now we're gonna start assembling the small side. You're gonna need a couple of Allens. I have this green thread locker, something to hold some nuts in place. These, because I got these from Home Depot, are Phillips head. If you get them from McMaster-Carr or somewhere like that, they'll probably be Allen. And then we have the screws listed in the BOM. These I cut down to 32 or 33 mil. What I did is I assembled it and then I just cut them when they were flush. It's okay if they poke out. I just did that for my personal use. Then we have these that are 10 mil long. These are, I want to say it's 8 mil underhead length, 4 of each. And we have a pillow block mount for this bearing, 12 millimeter diameter, and then we just have another 12 mil pillow block bearing, 2 printed slip ring mounts, a spacer, a 72 tooth gear. Mine's cut, yours doesn't have to be. I cut mine during a previous revision of Carbon, so don't worry about that. This piece came assembled with 4 screws. You need to remove those before proceeding. You have the printed part. This one, this way, is going on the outside. You can see an outline of how it was put together. But if I were you, I would just label out or something like that, because these are directional. This one doesn't need to be countersunk, but I kind of countersunk my other one backwards. So that became on this side. And then we have these corner pieces. These do have heat inserts in here on all 4 spots. Also, we'll make sure the corner pieces fit on there nicely. I'll probably make another video about assembling those, especially if you guys need. If not, it should be fairly straightforward. Make sure that nothing's in there from the printed part and you put in a heat inset. All right, now we're gonna get started with the assembly. So first, we're gonna put this bearing into this pillow block. Now, mine's a little bit harder to turn because I already put thread locker on here. It should just pop into place. Maybe not. There we go. We'll make sure it's all the way down. Yeah, it is. So, if you want to add a little dab of thread lock on here, you should be good. Sorry about the background noise. All right. Next. So this will set with that on the top, but that'll actually be the outermost piece. So you're gonna take the 72 tooth gear. We'll go ahead and put bolts through it. Make sure that's there. Crap. We're gonna take this pillow block. Make it so the larger spot sits on the inside. We are going to need to countersunk these. Sorry I didn't show those. If you have questions countersinking, feel free to reach out. I may do a video on prepping. But take those. They go from this spacer, or this bearing mount into the 72 tooth gear, through the printed spacer. All that does is make that so this will fit just right on here, then through this mount, and then we'll put nuts on the top. It's very weird to work with the camera on the front. So. And because these are nylon lock nuts, we don't need to worry about Loctite or anything like that there. Keep them nice and snug. And if you want these flush, now's the time where you can take your Dremel and cut them flush like mine, or you could just leave them a little long. They're not going to interfere with anything, it's just personal preference. Next is the slip ring mounts. I'm going to go ahead and put Loctite on those bolts. Not completely necessary on these. Not as much as that bearing, because these aren't necessarily moving parts. I just don't want things to come apart on my droid. So these also don't have a whole lot of thread sticking in because of how the pillow blocks are. There's a little bit, but not quite a whole lot for them to catch. So also, with that being said, be careful when you tighten these, because you don't want to pull the threads out of that that mount for the bearing. Then last, take the 2 inners. You can put Loctite on these. I'm not, because I know this is going to have to come apart shortly after this. So I would also start them both, kind of like I did, just get them through, get them started before you tighten either of them down, because that is going to want to move up and down a little bit and make sure it gets centered. You don't want to go too tight, because then you'll crack those like I did. Alright, so that's the small one, or the belt side. Now onto the chain side. Alright, now we are going to assemble the larger side, or the chain side, of the outer box. First, there are a couple of things that need to be prepared. These you need to put heat inserts into and make sure that these can fit into here easily. On this, either the front or the back, I don't know exactly which one it is or what I'll call it. This needs to be countersunk. This part is the same on both sides, so just pick a side. This one, the side mount, you do need to countersink it. Make sure it looks like this when you do your countersinking. Other than that, there's another part. This, you remove 2 of the screws out of that hold it. They come assembled in 4. I forgot to mention that on my other one, or other video about the smaller side. But anyways, we'll get to it. We'll go ahead. I forgot another thing that we need to prep is this piece. You need to make sure this bearing will go in there and fit nice. And you want it to be kind of like this, where it's snug. You don't want to have to force it in there, and you don't want the whole thing to be spinning around. That we're not going to use in this step, but we will use another one of these bearings in there later. So we are going to take this bearing that I was just telling you about. We're going to put it in one of the sides of here, like so. Take this guy, and it's the longer bolts that we have. I think they're 22 mil. These are, yeah, 22 mil. So you're going to take the 22 mil bolts, go through there, then go through there. You're going to flip, take your printed part, put it like that, throw that on top. That, and you want this bearing, there's a ledge, you want the bearing on the inside. So what that does is the bearing can't move in or out. Forgot to go over that. I will before we start putting this together, because that is kind of important. So the bearing does come out. If you put it in this way, the bearing may want to come this way. But if you put it on the back side, that'll keep it, when it's bolted to here, from being able to move in or out. So back to here. And then with this, because we removed those 2 bolts, or they were here and here, to give us a little bit of clearance. Now these bolts, because we're using nylon lock nuts, we do not need to worry about any sort of Loctite. You don't want it too tight, but you don't want it to come off either. If you get too tight, you're going to compress the plastic and potentially break it. So, all right, so now that side's done. All right, so after you have this bolted together, you're going to put your Loctite on this hex shaft. Now, just spinning it in by hand. Well, mine has Loctite on it, so it's a little harder to spin in. So spin it in by hand. Then we're going to back it off 1, 2 rotations. Okay, we're going to take it from this side, we're going to put it in. Kind of is interesting to put in because both of these are keyed. So you have to like spin it as you go in and pull it so it's nice and tight. And we're going to put our 6mm spacer, then our Rex. Now, I put Loctite in here, and as you're pulling on this, right, you either can pull on that or you can put an Allen under there and push on the Allen. Push down on the hex. So we're tightening these. So now this doesn't have any play and we can tighten this up. That's a bit too tight because what this is doing is setting preload. So you want it to spin freely. So I'll show you that again. Too tight. But if you do it just loose enough, so that it spins freely. Make sure you have the Loctite on there, so that way, there we go. It's not gonna come loose on you. Now when that's there, you take these 4 low profile hex, add Loctite on those. And you're gonna bolt that to here. Let me make sure. Constantly worrying about that. There we go. Now this side is done. This side is also done because we prepped that. Now on to this guy. Well, first, take this, put Loctite in. So the cool thing about this green Loctite is supposed to seep through threads. So supposedly you can put it on already installed bolts. But I don't know how accurate that is, but it's really cool that it's so thin that it gets through all the threads. All right, there we go. The bearing is installed. Maybe I should look at replacing that. Did I clamp it too tight? Don't over clamp that. So then we take our 18mm bolts, put them through there. Nylon lock nuts. Now, I did take on these, I cut down. They're not needed to be cut down. I just did that for personal kind of OCD. Problem is, it makes installing these harder. So the cut down length is 18mm, by the way. Some of these things I just used what I had, and then I wrote down the sizes after the fact. So, anyways. So tighten. If you ever notice, I am tightening things in a crisscross pattern. That prevents things from warping or you from getting it in like a weird bind. So it might not be super important, but it's just something that from my background I tend to do. So go here, here. Now we're going to take these four hex nuts, or hex bolts. I think they're 8mm underhead length. And we're going to bolt on these slip ring spacers. Don't need to be too hard, just on. All right, now that we got this guy, what we need to do, put these on. These you can Loctite. I'm not, because I know my personal one's gonna have to come off. But I would tighten them evenly. I would honestly use something more like this to tighten them than that, because that'll prevent you from over torquing them and breaking them. At least for me, I found that I could crack the plastic a little bit too too easily, so that's why I want to take these off. And now you're going to install these parts. This one can go, well, so you have the center line here. This one's going to go up here. So this bearing and this bearing will all line up on the same line. And this one, same thing. Because this bearing and this bearing are on the same plane, you're good. Now that that is together, what you can do is you can make sure that this will fit up with this. Just make sure everything lines up, and then you'll be able to get it together. That's the outer box, as you can see. So then you can pull this apart, or you can leave it together. Whenever you pull it apart, be careful about bending these as well as breaking those. It should be a snug fit, but I just did that because it's easier to test fit that now. Make sure it all fits together before putting it on the motor box and everything else.